We started this series with the goal of attempting some winter breaks, regardless of whether or not the weather was good, which is going against type for us. This winter in particular had found us pretty down. Christmas had been unusually glum and grey, and New Year's had come and gone even more unremarkably than usual. So a change of scene was feeling necessary, and while in England, heading north does not usually represent an improvement in weather, when it turned out we could stay in Cumbria comparatively inexpensively and we had a few days left before work picked up again, it was kind of a no-brainer. And I'd been craving going back to the Lake District. There's so much to see, and it seemed like an age since we were there last time. In fact, at this point, there's not many regions of the UK that are a complete gap for us. Here's that map again. So with each of these, we're going to just briefly summarise some of the main places we've already seen, just to avoid people wringing their hands in the comments because we seemingly haven't made a beeline to some of the best places. So this will be a recurring segment, which I've decided to call Previous Experience Required. So, first proper look at the Lake District. This was back in 2018. I got a crowd of friends there. This actually fell before I'd even started filming trips for episodes. I took a couple of thousand pics, but I did get some longer blocks of footage, which I was planning on using. Actually, I can't recall exactly what I had this earmarked for. Presumably it was a music project at the time. Anyway, Wastwater, an absolute treat, as well as a bunch of waterfalls and plenty of wholesome stuff. So, great. Then in the spring of 2021, now goodness knows we needed a change of scene by that point. Getting on a plane still wasn't an option, but with some faces that regulars to the channel will no doubt recognise, we headed up to the lakes for a few days. That was a great trip. We caught some of the major ruined abbeys in Yorkshire on the way up, as well as Swinside, Castlerigg, the main stone circles, also the Roman fort at Hardknott, the smell of burning clutch to match for those that know. I seem to recall three of us had to get out and push just to get up the most extreme parts, but all in all, it was a great time. We'd also briefly been through on our way to Scotland in the summer of 2022, where we stayed around Edinburgh and went to the Fringe. We caught some bits in passing, though we didn't have long before having to get further north. So, fast forward to the beginning of 2025, and title drop. Not to confuse things, but last year, shortly after the trip, we released a shorter video on driving to Scotland in a day. In case it wasn't clear, that was this trip, so I'm not going to go over that in too much depth. Suffice to say, that felt pretty great. While we arrived in darkness, I'm going to briefly jump ahead and show you our accommodation. So, attached to an otherwise rather aged service stop on the southbound side of the M6 is a Days Inn. It's a brand I'm not really familiar with, but if I had to guess, I'm going to say not a major stamp of quality, but this is the view. I think every room they have on site basically has this view. It's not a lake, technically, it's a reservoir, we'll get comments, but I think you can agree that this is absolutely ridiculous. And I think it was £40 a night. What is going on? This is way too good. I don't care if the fittings look a little dated. It was clean, and just look at it. So, the morning of our first full day, and since this was the first couple of days of January, and we're pretty far north in England, the sun didn't rise till after 8:30, but that's all right. That afforded me the ability to get into position. So up and about, and the first stop was actually towards the southern tip of Cumbria. This is Birkrigg Common. And just look at that sunrise over Morecambe Bay. This is the part of Cumbria that protrudes south, but also leaves this vast tidal estuary looking out towards Lancashire on the eastern bank. And on this particular morning, with the colours and everything else, just quite unbelievable. But, stealing the show somewhat, there's also a small stone circle here. This is Birkrigg. It's a couple of concentric circles, though the outer one is incomplete and kind of harder to see from the ground. Well, had a few things to get to, and this was supposed to be the best day for weather, so wanted to make the absolute most, but the large ominous clouds in the opposite direction and the rain showers we were getting had other ideas. Well, my next target was going to be a hill fort, but quick change of plan. Not at all far away in the village of Great Urswick, this is the Church of St Mary and St Michael. Apparently, the lower levels of the tower are Norman, and there's this tiny door at the base. I'll be honest, not of the greatest interest architecturally, but as luck would have it, at that exact moment, a couple of ladies came to unlock the church, and it's what's inside that's of real interest. There's a few finds in a case, including what's labelled as a Roman nail. I'm A little sceptical, but okay. There's also a minor Saxon cross fragment at the base of a rather plain Norman font, but there we go. This is an elaborately carved piece of an ancient cross. It's part of some of the more ancient fragments of Britain from after the Romans left, but before the Norman conquest. It wasn't even something I'd deliberately set up as a theme for this trip. It was just working out that way. On the way up, we'd caught these sandback crosses and also the Halton cross. And while, yes, there are churches that still contain parts or traces of their earliest Saxon founding, and we've been enthusiastically ticking those off around the country. In fact, as far as substantial Saxon portions of churches, there's not many left that we haven't seen. But as you go deeper, Saxon crosses remain some of the most significant pieces of contemporary art that we have from this part of English history. They're a rare shard of light into the years that we know a lot less about. This particular fragment was found during work to expand a window in 1911. It was just built into the fabric of the church. The runic script here reads, "This cross Tunwini erected in the memory of Tortred, a monument to his lord. Pray for his soul." There is an interesting rabbit hole that these runes might be overlaying an earlier text, which someone's partly reconstructed. I'm not going to go into that too much. It's worth looking into, though. It has big implications. But onwards from there, and the rain was slackening off. In fact, I had to pull over and shoot this. Just look at that. I know this isn't how diffraction works, but I think that particular house might have just won something. So this next one I had seen before, but just couldn't resist since we were so close. This is Furness Abbey. It's this whacking great, massive ruined abbey on the outskirts of Barrow-in-Furness, and it's an absolute wonder. You can see these vast metal supports holding up some of the larger pieces of the walls. It does detract slightly from the vibe, but clearly necessary. We'd been here in 2021, but it felt great to be back. This time got a bit of a better look at the gatehouse. The abbey wasn't open yet, but walking around the perimeter, you can pretty much see everything. The first monks settled here in 1127, and it would go on to be one of the most significant monastic centres in the northwest, also founding several daughter houses, such as Inch Abbey in Northern Ireland and others. So doubling back, and now with the weather somewhat improved, could get a quick look at Skelmore Heads Hill Fort. This is just above Great Urswick. The Lake District was hugely significant in the Neolithic. Probably not that surprising when you see the stone circles, but there were things like these gorgeous polished axes being made from Langdale. But while not necessarily an indication of less activity, the Iron Age traces in the landscape are much fewer. So it was nice to catch this fort, even though it is quite slight. Anyway, this so far is all South Cumbria, and while we've had a very nice view of the bay, no lakes yet. So let's rectify that. So got back on the road, and a van smashed into the back of our car. Yeah. Well, because of insurance considerations, I have a few snaps of this, but yes. So, up ahead, a postal van stopped dead in the middle of a 50 zone, and seeing brake lights with barely any time, I came to a halt and just stopped short of the car in front. But, as if in slow motion, I looked up at my mirror and saw a very large van, failing to brake in time, slam into the back of me and shunt me into the car in front. I was unhurt, kind of shocked, more just, oh hey, it's this bad dream / invasive thought, but IRL, wow, okay. I was fortunate that it was just me in the car at this point. Jen and Weasel were still back at the hotel. I don't think the three of us would have walked away with any serious injuries, but it's still nice not to have car accidents with your son who's not even one. And look, everyone was very nice, commiserated, exchanged deets. Well, not the postal van, that just carried on regardless. The car was running, and the damage looked, well, damaged, but I feel like I've seen worse running on the road. And our accommodation, despite being on a motorway, or perhaps because, had no public transport links of any kind. So rather than marooning all of us, and mainly just not feeling safe to stay on the verge of this road, I drove the car off, and it handled no different. So I held out some optimism that this was solvable. But it was, of course, very unpleasant. Probably one of the single worst things that's happened on a trip. Okay, well, actually, maybe nearly getting stuck in Jordan at the outbreak of COVID. That did work itself out in the end, but I don't know. Point is, this was bad and upsetting, and the footage of outside couldn't have been more inappropriate for this moment. Just glorious blue skies and sunshine. I don't know if people have heard of the pathetic fallacy. It's a trope in theatre, TV and cinema when it begins to rain when the main character is sad. Well, this was not that. In fact, it was almost comically opposite. We're having these rather stressful conversations with the insurance while looking out at this. And yeah, just sort of trying to put a brave face on this spectacularly halted trip. We did have this lovely golden hour just after 3. You know what's more funny about this? The whole grey days concept was, well, we'll just make the best of winter weather in spite of it being a bit grey and grim. And yet, so far, the 2 days we'd had, glorious sunshine. I mean, bitterly cold with it, but amazing conditions, despite not being able to make the most of it post 10 a.m. or whenever I got hit. However, let's not speak too soon, because whatever the sky looked like now, the news was all this. So, for the avoidance of doubt, as of the next day, if we didn't get another vehicle sorted, we were quite possibly going to be snowed into this particular service station for several more days than just the weekend we had booked. Without giving you every single detail on the car, I feel like if I keep talking about this, I'll start getting robocalls again like, have you been in an accident recently? The car, despite being drivable, was a write-off. The insurance was supposed to be sorting us a hire car, and they did say, oh yeah, Enterprise will pick you up. Enterprise do lead their marketing with, we'll pick you up. But if you call a lot of branches, they're all like, there's like 2 of us here and we're rushed off our feet, so we 100% cannot pick you up. It's this subject to availability large enough to eclipse the sun. So instead, the following day, we had to pay out of pocket to get a taxi to Kendal. And even though we finally got a vehicle, which was this Citroen, which kind of felt weird to drive, to be honest, there was nothing left of the trip to salvage. The news was very clear. They kept saying how massively disruptive this bomb of snow was going to be. So if we didn't get around here, kind of level with Oxford, before 6 p.m, we were getting snowed in. Perversely, the trip had gone from almost too nice to be in a playlist called Grey Days to weather so bad we couldn't even continue. We just had to peg it back home on the Saturday 24 hours sooner than planned. So when I said this series was going to be a bit more autobiographical, this was not the level I had in mind. And for the trip promised in the thumbnail, this is an exceptionally poor start. Looking at the runtime, I don't want to leave you without a bit more from the Lake District. I guess as a consolation prize, I've got to at least sub in this section of some of the things around Penrith that we'd caught in the previous trip, the one where we were on the way to Edinburgh. So driving from Lancaster, where we'd stayed the previous night, and we'd caught just some of the historic things around the city, as well as dropping in on this gorgeous little Saxon ruin at Heysham. This is looking out on the opposite side of Morecambe Bay from Berkeley. Now, while Cumbria does have these incredible Neolithic monuments in amongst some of the most iconic views in England, a lot of these are around its more mountainous core. But on the eastern side of the M6, there's also this cluster of incredible sites. So this is Maybury Henge. For those who don't know what a henge monument is, it's basically large earthen banks that delineate a space. Sometimes they'd have a stone circle in the middle, sometimes not. And yes, these are Neolithic, so 4.5, maybe 5,000 plus years old. In this case, Maybury has just one standing stone remaining. Pretty sure there were others before. And as if that's not enough, just a few yards down the road is another henge, partially destroyed by the road, but this is Arthur's Round Table, or at least the monument is named as such. It is, of course, nothing of the kind, only proving once again that people over the centuries are prepared to really bend the definition of a table if they find something circular that they want to slap Arthur's name on. Well, just a little north of Penrith, and if we can just for a moment enjoy the potential geographical mishaps that can occur between Penrith in Cumbria, a short distance from the Scottish border and rich in standing stones, with Penwith, the westernmost tip of Cornwall, also rich in standing stones. Now, while it's hard to imagine a human operator of a vehicle making a sat-nav blunder so considerable it takes them around 8 hours out of their way, even when fully autonomous vehicles become less of a death trap and people are keying in destinations in the evening before tucking themselves in for a sleep overnight, I cannot wait for the first case of someone waking up here as opposed to, say, Sennen Cove. Anyway, a little further out of town into the countryside, this is Long Meg and her daughters. This absolutely vast circle with this tall outlier and its enigmatic pattern of cup and ring marks outside of the main circle. You know, it is interesting how standing stones and stone circles vary around the British Isles. You can see from above that the form here is somewhat irregular, much like Castlereagh and Swinside in shape, also similar to those. The stones are pretty large and stocky, kind of spherical. Compare that to the stones of, say, Orkney, where Stenness or Brodgar and others are much thinner. Well, this circle is the third largest in diameter in England, though surprisingly complete. Well, for the most part. Apparently, despite having 66 stones now, it may have originally had 77, but it's an incredible place, and there's more to come. Not far away is the Little Meg Circle. This is much smaller, just tucked on the edge of a field. I'm embarrassed to say I hadn't clocked that this had ring marks, so while I got a few shots, I didn't actually search for those. Whoops. So having lost all credibility with the stone bothering community, just a little to the north, one that's nowhere near as well known, Glastonbury Circle. It's just in a sheep field, but clear to see. There it is. So all of this was the sort of thing we were hoping to see in January, kind of around Penrith and that region, plus a lot more churches with Saxon and even Viking traces, a couple of Roman forts. Yeah, so not the greatest start to the series. It actually kind of made me question everything. When I'd done these longer drives before, for example, like heading up to Leeds and seeing some stuff around the north, you're aware that you might break down or get into trouble and be stranded, but you just don't think about it as a thing that could happen until it does. And then you're stuck hundreds of miles from home. If it had been Dartmoor or something, it would be a pain, but it's just about almost in reach. And in an absolute crisis, like a close friend could come and get us. But yeah, I found myself reevaluating every plan I had that was more than an hour radius from home. It was a dark mood to be in. I know some of you have driven for decades and you might find this a bit silly, but bear in mind, I'd only passed my test just a little over a year previous, so this was an unpleasant experience all round. But as you can see from the playlist, we did indeed get out again before too long, though. Yeah, speaking of Dartmoor, all of the West Country locations somewhat close to home were suddenly looking way more attractive. Oh, and yeah, by the way, the journey home was very dull. Can we particularly shout out the Moto Hilton Park on the M6? Yeah, honestly, looks like what you'd get from an AI with the prompt evil service station. So there'll be more in the Grey Days playlist. Spoiler alert, there's no more car crashes this season, but if you've enjoyed the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can catch it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. Otherwise, please find us on Blue Sky. These episodes take quite a while to make, hovering around sort of 20 to 30 hours, whereas on Blue Sky, we can be posting more regularly about what we're doing on kind of a week-to-week basis. Otherwise, check out the playlist, and we'll catch you very soon.